yet.
Okay, well, I got to thank Eric for contacting me and asking me to come down here to talk to you folks this evening. It might be a very boring subject to you. History is to some folks, but on the other hand, it might be quite interesting. So what we have in Maine is a long history of beekeeping activities, and it goes way back into the 1800s, in fact. So what I'm going to do is show a bunch of these slides and focus on what they might mean to you all. I gave Eric a CD so it can be copied if you need a copy for your own personal use in the future. Let's see now. I guess that takes care of the introduction. My credentials are that I'm not a master beekeeper. I want you all to know that. I'm a professional biologist, and I've been keeping bees in the state of Maine as a hobbyist for 76 years now. Yeah, no, I gotta back that up. It's 67 years there, that's what it is.
Still a long time.
Well, I'm 85, I'm 86 plus, okay? So, the whole idea of this business of ancient history and beekeeping goes way back to the Paleolithic era. And a lot of discoveries in Spain and other parts of the world about the hieroglyphics on rocks of bee hunters, what we call bee hunters. In Maine, we had people that would line bees years ago. I used to do that with my relatives, and to find bee trees and cut them down and kill the bees and take the honey. Pretty crude way of doing it. So there are two world species of honeybees. There's the western and the eastern. The eastern honeybee is pretty much located in Asia, and the European honeybee is what we call western honeybee, Apis mellifera. It's the only bee Apidae family that's located in North America. There's no other family of members of the family Apidae. And as you all know from your learning and beekeeping, that Apis mellifera means a honey gatherer. So much so that we manipulate our colonies to produce the highest yield possible, just like farmers would do for cattle or chickens or hogs or anything. We manipulate the animal to our benefits. If they're in the wild, where they go in tree cavities or houses or chimneys, they don't use the volume or capacity in the Langstroth hive. They're much less capacity, in fact. So it's got to survive as an organism in the hive, and we refer to it as the superorganism. We humans are really superorganisms. If you think of all of the cells that make up the different organs we have in our body, they must function to make us operate efficiently. The bees are the same way, except you have a queen, and you have workers, and you have a few drones. They all work together as one for one, all for one and one for all. And that's why we often refer to this as the hive or the colony as a superorganism. It cannot function as an individual cell by itself. All must work together to function properly. And you all are familiar with this photo, I'm sure, in your beginning bee classes. There's no drones in this photo, but the drones were important, of course, when that queen was mated. So the honeybee is an invasive species. It's not native to the New World at all. It was brought here by our forebearers, our forefathers, our colonists, the people that came to this country, whether they were the Spaniards in Florida or the English colonies and French colonies in the upper part here in New England and North America. but they've often been referred to as the white man's fly, but they've been here for nearly 500 years. So perhaps we could say, and not call it an invasive species, we could call it a naturalized species, like we are. We're naturalized species, okay? We're invasive, we're just as invasive as the insect was, because we're not native to this country either. So we brought the Spaniards probably, based on my research work, probably brought the first honeybees into Florida back in 1500s, about 100 years before the English colonies in Plymouth Rock was founded. And then during the 1600s, the 13 colonies, they were shipping a lot of bees. When I was in Florida, Beverly and I went to St. Augustine, which is where Ponce de Leon landed, and in St. Augustine they were celebrating the 500-year anniversary of the landing. In fact, the governor was there, and a lot of contingents from Spain was there as well. And I started talking to the historians there to find out just when probably the Spaniards brought colonies of bees in. If you probably think about your history a little more, a lot of the missions and churches used candles in their ceremonies. And the candles were made out of what? Beeswax. There was no paraffin back in those days. So obviously they must have had bee colonies around to be able to have the paraffin to manufacture the candles. And so I talked to some of the historians, and I wanted to look at some ship manifests to see what was on the manifest that the Spaniards might have been bringing in at that time when they were occupying Florida. And you could find things like cattle, hogs, horses, citrus crops of different kinds, citrus species, and also candles, beeswax, and honey. So I say, in my opinion, based on what little bit of research that I did, I think they came in at least about 100 years before the English colonies ever had honeybees in this part of the world. And as the European settlers moved west, there were honeybees that the Native Americans were finding, and they referred to it as the white man's fly, because they always were in advance of the settlers moving across the country. So Maine itself has a lot of information, and it was a flourishing business. All kinds of patents were invented back in those days of development. And honey was an important source, as you know, as a sweetener, because there was no manufacturing of sugar at that time. So a look at some of the early stuff that I have in my own collection was Stephen Titcomb from Farmington and Lizzie Cotton from West Gorham. Lizzie Cotton had many, many patents that she developed in her hives that she had, and she disagreed with Langstroth in his 3/8 of an inch bee space. It was kind of interesting. She would not adopt his bee space, and that was, he discovered this bee space in 1861, just prior to the Civil War. So Griffin did a lot of work up at Caribou, and then John Lovell down in Waldoboro, he wrote a nice book. I have 2 copies of it, in fact, on honey plants of North America. And then Charles Dirks, back in '52, I was a student of Charles when I was in Orono in my undergraduate days. And so I got to know him well. In fact, I've got some of these books here that you might want to take a look at here at the break afterwards. They're out of print, okay? All those documents that I'm talking about are out of print, except for these 2 books here. These are ancient. The Hive and the Honeybee is one of the first copies I bought way back in the 60s, and then the ABC book. All of these have been updated and revised. This was used as a textbook when I took Charles Dirks course. So all of these things were happening, and the competition that was going on at that time was interesting, because people were actually developing all these patents that they were trying to establish things in beekeeping that were the best. Theirs were the best, okay? Competition, that's what it is. And I mentioned Dr. Dirks' book, the first one he wrote in 1936, but McFarland and Seacrest did some research work on honeybee hives and heating back in the 1940s. McFarland was from Solon, and then in 1952, Dr. Dirks published his second piece of work, which I have both copies here, in fact. Okay, any questions as I go through this now? Ask them. I may not have the answer, but we ought to discuss it, okay?
Were they mostly keeping in Langstroth hives at that time?
After probably the 1900s, not until then, even though Langstroth hives were being sold on the market after 1861, it wasn't until about 1900 when we even got out of what we call the slum gum logs, the old skeps. All of those old fixtures were used by old-time beekeepers. They didn't want to change. And so the answer to your question is that no, Langstroth hives really weren't developed, weren't accepted there until around the 1900s, the turn of the century.
So you said Lizzie Cotton argued about the bee
What's that?
space. You said Lizzie Cotton argued about the bee space.
she had different kinds of hives. I've seen pictures of them. I don't have any in my slide collection, but she patented all of her equipment, and she really didn't want to change, and she had a good business going on. So it's like all of those inventors didn't want to change.
So did she have her own idea what bee space was, or
didn't care? I don't think.
just let them go?
I don't think, as long as they were producing comb honey at that time, I don't think they cared.
Make them happy, right?
So this whole reign of beekeeping, the booklet that Abbott did back in 1899, right at the turn of the century in Lewiston, showed a big change that people were going to accept the Langstroth hive, okay? And that's really what we pretty much accept today. Except you run 9 frames, you run 10 frames. I mean, it depends on what you want. But the bee space is still there. There's some frames up there that you put them together and you'll see the bee space. This is an interesting comment here about the Penquist Beekeepers Association, which became really part of the old Maine Association of Beekeepers. Harold Swan's father was the one who was the president back then. The whole family is from Brewer, and I'll mention him a little bit later. But it was Harold's father that was a forerunner. He worked for the American Tell and Tell, and he got involved in commercial pollination of blueberries from the state of Maine, one of the first ones. And there's three generations in that family. I happen to know this gentleman from down in Wayne who developed a patent. That family and also the Graffham family over in Whitefield. But the 3 generations here was Harold's father and his son Richard. Because the only one alive today is Richard. So the anatomy and physiology of the honeybee was first described by this gentleman, Snodgrass, which was, Snodgrass was one of the early workers in the U.S. Department of Agriculture doing entomology work on this insect. So beekeeping in the United States, again, we kept them in skeps and logs and shaped boxes and glass until about the 1800s. And then when Langstroth got the space committed to 3/8 of an inch, about the turn of the century in 1900 that people started adopting the Langstroth philosophy and hive. So that was during the Civil War. Langstroth was a pastor from Andover, Massachusetts, and he retired out in Ohio. That's where he actually passed away, is out there. So they made him kind of made him the father of modern beekeeping as time went on. But there's 4 major discoveries that were done that did solidify beekeeping really throughout the world. And these 4 gentlemen here really became prominent, and their products all been manufactured by other people today. But the discovery of the bee space being the first, then the foundation press. When the foundation press was created, it was to develop the hexagonal shapes of the cells so that they could press this out on beeswax, pure beeswax, and it really revolutionized the whole basis for honeybees in us as being husbands of bee husbandry. We were able to really make honey much better. Now today we have what? Plastic. We have plastic in wax mounted, we have pure wax, and we have artificial with metal today, in fact. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I have always used pure beeswax, and I still do today. I never changed after I learned the hobby of beekeeping. So the extractor, probably was another big step that helped everyone out, is to be able to spin this honey out of the combs after you cut the caps off. Because prior to that, we were just cutting the combs, waxing, slicing them, putting them in boxes, and selling it as comb honey. Comb honey was done other ways, but the cutting of it was really a loss of the wax product, which takes, as you know, a lot of energy, takes a lot of honey to make a pound of beeswax. It's what, around six times that. So the extractor was very important, and it is today. We have radial extractors, we have all different sizes of manufactured extractors, and they all work really nice. And then the smoker. And the smoker was important as far as management goes, to kind of quiet the bees down as much as possible. And smoking was done pretty crudely many years ago, in burning anything from corn cobs to burlap to silk and other pieces of clothing which had dyes in them and chemicals that could be pretty toxic to the insect. So the bellows now are made today, and there's still different kinds of fuel, but you can buy pretty clean commercial fuels today. I'll tell you what I use. I use pine needles. Now pine needles have resins in them, okay? And resins can be overwhelming at times too, so I think you have to be careful you don't oversmoke your bees. This is an old photo of Langstroth himself. He was, like I said, he was a reverend. He had health issues, but he ended up going out to near Medina, Ohio, to retire and live out the rest of his days. He was a really interesting gentleman, I think, based on what I've read. Now, the Maine Beekeepers Association was created in 1976, and all part of the mission of the beekeepers. Now they really modernized, of course, with a website. You people are all chapters. I remember when I first got involved with the association and helped out. It's really grown. With this Tri-County Association, I remember years ago, people in this room probably remember the Delicatas.
I do.
Al Delicata and Genevieve.
Genevieve.
Yeah. They were from Massachusetts, but she was, I guess, originally her ancestors from Maine, and they settled and came back to Maine and retired at Stockton Springs. But they were really prominent. Al himself was probably the best cut comb honey producer in the United States, I'd say. at least in the Eastern Apicultural Society. This was our first newsletter. It was a one-page. I have a copy of that in my that I scanned in my documents. And Bill Nolet was the newsletter editor at that time, and he printed up that one page. That was the first one we had in the fall of '76. So the value of bees to Maine agriculture, back in 2008, we brought the most colonies into Maine for blueberries, and most of you people live down here kind of in the edge of the blueberry country. And the fee for the hive then was about $100 for a few weeks, and most of the money that was brought in, of course, it leaves Maine. We don't have enough bees to do the pollination that's required here for the species of plants. Jennifer Lund is the new state apiarist. She took over Tony Jadzak's position, and Tony's doing research now with on varroa mites. That's what he's doing. He's tied up with Bayer, and he does 3-year contracts with them. I see Tony, well, maybe a couple of times a year. He's pretty busy, but I live in Belgrade, and he lives in Oakland. But she is a graduate of Orono, and she's with the department. You probably have had him here speaking to you folks. And I'm impressed with her abilities and what she knows. Now, the national value of the food that we consume and the pollination of that food has a total U.S. economic value in 1989 of about $14.6 billion, and in 2008 those dollars have expanded up to $28 billion. I don't know what that number is today. I have no idea. I'm not an economist, and I don't know how to extrapolate different years to expand that number, but it is much more than that now. Okay. Now, the number of colonies in the United States has gone down, you know, for a number of reasons, or the whole plethora of reasons why, but basically one of the largest ones I see is habitat fragmentation. The loss of habitat for the insect and the food available for them has gone downhill, so it's not surprising. In 1980 we had about 4.5 million, and now pretty much around a 3 million figure right now. It's holding at this number. The almond production in California can use all of those insects, that many colonies during the almond production in pollination in February of each year. I've seen numbers of trucks traveling across the country when I was driving and in a motorhome across the country, and seeing these insects being hauled from Florida to California, and from Florida to Maine, and back to the Dakotas, all across the country. They're moved all over the place. So I think that we as beekeepers in Maine, I never got involved that much in pollination, except a little bit on blueberries and strawberries and apples. I don't do any of that anymore. Heck, I'm just I can't lift much more than 50 pounds as far as supers and high bodies go now. I don't have the strength I used to have. So it's pretty valuable. About one every 3 food products that we consume, that's you know, whether they're not grains, but they're fruits and vegetables mostly, and lots of nuts trees, they require pollination. And that, I told you about the economic value. You know, I guess that's, get back to these factors that are affecting honeybees, the habitat fragmentation, probably some pesticides and fertilizer pollution, certainly chemicals and sprays across the country that's being used. And finally, the last figure that I saw in a fairly recent publication on the American Entomological Society was 4 things listed, but the last one was climate change. And that's that's debatable, but the climate sure as hell is changing as far as I'm concerned. In my 8.5 decades that I've been on this earth, I see a big change in our climate. Weather patterns are daily things that we see, but long term is the climate. So the conclusion that I have for you folks before we get to questions and answers is that honeybees in space invasive, I said? Well, so are we, okay? The honeybee is the official state insect, by the way. And our diverse food source is dependent on it. And we don't have enough honeybees, as I said earlier, to do the pollination. Now this gentleman right here is a prominent honeybee biologist, is Dr. Carl von Frisch, who got the Nobel Prize back in 1973 for his discovery and research work on the dancing of the bees. That is using the sun magnetic compass for directions with the sun and locating flowers. And that was a revelation, I should say, for the insect world and beekeeping. And of course, people back years ago were lining bees. They were lining bees and using a compass and using markers or powder to mark the bees to help locate where the trees were, where these insects might be. So that's it in a nutshell, and I don't know if I bored you or not. If I did, I apologize, okay?
Not even a little bit.
I'm here. I don't know what else that I can talk about bees all night long, but Eric said, you know, history he was interested in. Anyway, share that CD with your friends, okay?
Yep.
All right. Yeah.
What was
You want some lights back on?
what was beekeeping like before Varroa? Like you said, you had been keeping for a long time. What was it like before Varroa? Because I was.
Oh, the life. Eric's just asked a good question. What was life like for beekeepers before Varroa? Well, I can tell you what it was like. It was American foul brood. And it was the worst damn situation I've ever seen in my life. Foul brood was everywhere in Maine. I bet the percent rate of foul brood in Maine was up around 30%. It was just running rampant. We had no inspection, no program. And when Tony came, he really cleaned up everything and got it down to less than 2%. But that's what it was like. It was, you had to worry about foul brood, and you had nothing else to really worry about in beekeeping. And there was no mites, there was no other pests, no parasites. Oh, there were diseases, but foul brood was the prominent disease. European foul brood was easy to control. You could do requeen and clean that up. But there was, back in my early days, we were using a product called sulfathiazole. Sulfathiazole was a drug to use to control foul brood. And it was very toxic.
Sounds awful.
In fact, it was toxic to beekeepers. And it was contaminating honey as well. So it was taken off the market, and right around between 1965 and 1970, terramycin was developed. And terramycin, being an antibiotic, is could contaminate food if you use too much of it, but it controlled foul brood, didn't kill it, it just controlled it, that's all. And once you got foul brood and it run rampant through your hives, you had to burn them. I experienced foul brood twice in my lifetime, and I had to burn everything that I had just to clean it up, and that's how bad it was. Now, Varroa, in my opinion, is the worst thing since foul brood, okay? And Varroa is a parasite that is a bug on top of another bug, and it's terrible. And I have to treat in the spring and I treat in the fall, and I get 100% survival so far over the last 10, 15 years. But it's not fun. It's a scourge of beekeeping today. The parasitic mites. We have to use either formic acid, or I use formic acid, and I use oxalic in the fall. Formic in the spring and oxalic in the fall. But that's how bad things were, Eric. It was terrible. So,
How many colonies?
foul brood hasn't gone away, by the way. No, it's not disappeared at all. It's been kind of suppressed in kind of, well, what you call overshadowed by the horrific mite issue.
How many colonies are you running?
What's that?
How many colonies are you running?
I'm running 5 now.
Yep.
I was doing 12, and after my wife passed away, I reduced down. I used to run 25, 35 colonies, but I had 3 sons. They were my labor. That's what it was. Child labor, I guess you could call it. But they helped me move bees, and they helped me take care of bees, and did all that. And in fact, they earned merit badges in Boy Scout on beekeeping. But no, I'm down to 5 colonies, and in fact, I want to get down to 3. That's just what I want to do. I can't go. Let me tell you something that I wouldn't say to. I tell beginners, 1 colony really isn't good. You got to have 2. You got to have some way to compare the 2 as to how things are functioning. And you don't know with 1 how well it's doing if you don't have something else to go by.
Do your sons still keep bees?
I'm sorry?
Do your sons still keep bees?
No, they don't.
No.
No.
You wore 'em
worked
out.
Well,
Broke
I wore them out, but I think probably they've learned their lesson too. I serve as a mentor for 3 other people right now, and that takes a lot of time too. And I don't mind helping people, but you kind of reach a plateau where you say enough is enough, and well, I can't seem to say no. Eric emailed me, and I said, yeah, I'll come down. So,
Well, thank you.
We appreciate it.
but well, thank you all. I'm glad to answer any other questions, but I'll have to make sure that I don't usurp anyone else's authority here, because, like I said, I'm not a master beekeeper, but I sure as hell know how to keep honeybees. I can tell you that. Okay? And all the trials and tribulations of going through keeping bees at my farm in Belgrade. What I see even in Belgrade is beekeepers, too many beekeepers, that is, interactions I call them, because they're too close, okay? You know, a couple of miles apart is good, but when you have beekeepers that are, you know, just a short distance from you, they're going to share, you're going to share their problems, or they're going to share your problems, because the bees don't know. They're just traveling the flowers, and they might hop a ride from here to there, and bees drift around, so it's and all of your drones, when they go to the drone concentration areas, they're coming from all these hives, and they hover around waiting for virgin queens, and then they mate. So you don't know where the drones are coming from. There's nothing wrong with that, because in nature the same thing happens. But I just want to tell you, if we have too many beekeepers and they're crowded, you're going to be sharing their problems.
Was Tony the first state apiarist?
Yes, Tony was the first official bee apiarist inspector, entomologist for the department, yes.
What was it like before?
It was all part-time, commercial operators being paid part-time work, didn't have the time to do it. Some of them were teaching schools. It was kind of haphazard. And the beekeepers didn't like it when some of these part-time people were telling them, well, we got to burn your hives. You know, you're contaminated. Tony just used his authority as far as the state inspection goes, and he just, I mean, sometimes he might have to get the sheriff or the police to go with him, but he did take care of the problems and cleaned them up.
Is Genevieve still around?
I I don't know. No, I don't think so. Her daughter is, but I don't think she's around. And of course, I went to Al's funeral down here at Searsport years ago. But, no, I don't know. But I suspect that's the case, but I'm guessing. Okay? I've been around too long myself, probably, okay? I tell everyone I'm gonna stay around as long as I can and aggravate everyone. But if you'd like to look at some of these, I'll be glad to pass them around. Just don't keep them, okay?
Don't keep 'em.
They're collector's items, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's like rain.
Yeah, he said it was pouring.
Which ones are not printed?
Right.
Yeah, it's just the two.